afternoon, everyone. My name is Tiffany Harrison, and I'm a program specialist with the SREB State Doctoral Scholars Program here at the Southern Regional Education Board. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce you to Amy Lay, the SEE coordinator at our partner institution, Texas A&M University. Amy is a passionate leader and advocate who has invested much of her career in building strong individuals and helping them identify and achieve their goals. She is courageous, empathetic, and resilient. She seeks to understand individuals and enjoys taking the opportunity to service them through their concerns. She values providing an atmosphere through confidentiality, consistency, and creativity. Amy leads Texas A&M's grad school efforts to advance, implement, and execute measurable actions leading towards greater diversity, equity, and inclusion in the graduate and professional community. She is currently pursuing her PhD in educational leadership. Today, Amy will be speaking with us on the importance and the usage of self-advocacy in academia. This will be an engaging and interactive webinar, and I encourage all of our listeners to participate. So with that, I will turn it over to Amy.
Thank you, Tiffany, for such a warm introduction. First, I would like to say thank you to SREB committee, Dr. Abraham, Tiffany, and Veronica for this opportunity. I don't take it lightly. But good afternoon to everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. As she stated, we will be talking about self-advocacy in academia. When we talk about self-advocacy, a lot of times we may think about different experiences that we've had or being an advocate, and a lot of times those types of things have changed over the years. But I just wanted to kind of give you an example of something that has been stated in research: an individual's ability to effectively communicate, convey, negotiate, or assert his or her own interests, desires, needs, and rights. So you will see here what I consider my community. Wherever we start, no one is self-made. Even if we say that we are, we really aren't if you think about it. So when I first thought about self-advocacy, I really learned how to advocate originally from my family. I'm seeing them stand up for me in school when I didn't necessarily get a good grade or something was challenging. I would run home and say something to my grandmother about it, as she was an educator for several years. And she taught me how to go back and have a conversation with my teachers. Back then, that wasn't necessarily a term that was coined as advocacy, but that was what that was. So across this picture, you'll see something that I titled multidimensional mentors. What I mean by that is that when I started out in my education, they started out as academic mentors, but as I've transitioned into my career, they have now continued to be professional mentors to me as well. You'll also see a circle for me as my friends. They've seen me through being able to play hopscotch, double dutch, also graduating, and now being able to be a part of my professional career. You'll see an area down here that's called my mentees, people that I have reached back to, being able to set an example for them about things that worked well and things that didn't, but trying to offer advice for them in their academic areas, spiritual spaces, things that were challenging and things that were great. Another multidimensional mentor was a professor that I had that was very engaging with me about things that I was on the path of doing well, that tailored towards self-advocacy, conversations that I was having that she challenged me on that you may not be having that conversation so great. So that's where I had my first professional space conversation about self-advocacy. And on the final circle, you'll see professional. I have a organization that I have, and this is my business partner and also my assistant. Why I put this on here is very important to just moving forward in the space of self-advocacy. I think it's important for us to have a layer of inspiration. Those you have that have inspired you, those that are on the line of helping you to inspire, and those that you reach back to create inspiration for. I think that that's something that we should keep in the forefront of our mind as we are transitioning through self-advocacy, but just through life in general. So I came up with the acronym because I realized just for myself, but also with us as individuals, when we have something to hold on to with the acronym, it's easier for us to remember. So I titled it SPACE. When we're having conversations just with people in general, there's something to kind of hold fast to about how you position yourself in different areas. So the S stands for straight. Your posture makes a big difference in when you're communicating with people. If you sit in a position, if I came on this presentation and was slouched, a lot of times you wouldn't necessarily think that I was serious or that I was concerned about the conversation. We would say, well, maybe I wouldn't necessarily assume that, but a lot of times our perceptions of how people sit and how they engage with us make a difference of whether we think that they're assertive and confident in what they're talking about. The P is about your pleasant tone. How you speak to someone is just as important as what you say. Attune. Now, we don't use this word a lot, but what it is focused around is making sure that you're taking in what someone is saying. And it also means to bring harmony, to interact in the conversation and to compare your ideas. It's kind of tailored with active listening. So you don't just have a conversation to respond, but that you're taking in and engaging with what they have to say and compare their thoughts with yours. You have a framework of understanding that not necessarily what they say is wrong, but that it's a different perspective as well. The C, create a calm environment within yourself. And you may be thinking, Amy, what do you mean by creating a calm environment within yourself? Well, a lot of times when we're advocating for ourselves, it's about something that we're very passionate about. So the first thing that precedes us is not our words, it's our emotions. And so it's very important for us to be mindful of the emotions and dealing with those first before we have a conversation. And because this conversation is for you, there's a need for you to be calm when you're approaching it. The last one is eye contact. If you're having a conversation with someone and you're not looking them in the eye, or someone's not looking you in the eye, the first thing that you tend to be challenged about is that they're not concerned about what you're talking about. Challenges. So these are just some common challenges that tend to be tailored around self-advocacy. It's a perceived lack of knowledge or expertise. We think that we don't know enough or we're not an expert in this area, so we just tend to avoid it or not even engage in it at all. Not being clear of your needs. Sometimes you don't necessarily know exactly what it is that you need. Lack of resources. You may not necessarily have the resources that you need to advocate for yourself. Not knowing where to begin. Where do I start with the conversation? Is it me starting with the issue? Do I start with the person? Where do I go to with the conversation? A big one with self-advocacy is self-confidence. Do I really feel like I'm the person that should be having this conversation? Am I worthy enough? Fear of conflict. A lot of times when we talk about conflict, we think it's bad. It's coined as a term that's something that's bad. There's a difference between bad conflict and there's a such thing as healthy conflict. It's okay. There's a such thing as healthy dialogue. Feeling like the conversation will not make a difference. What's the point? It's not going to go well anyway. I might as well not have the conversation. And so because of that, a lot of times we refrain from doing anything at all, but the person that is the most challenged by it is still us. But what if you do have the conversation? And what if it makes a difference not only for you, but for someone that's coming behind you? So as we're transitioning into this conversation, I want you to keep these in your mind if they may be challenges that you've already had, but also just to dispel the notion that it's not worth you having a conversation, because it is. So these are going to be our three main focal points. Number one, the importance of understanding what it is that you need. So when we have a challenge with wanting to advocate, we are all over the place when our emotions tend to be at the forefront. Well, I want this, and I want that, and I want this, and I want that. That doesn't mean that the 3 or 4 things that come up are not important, but focusing on one at a time. What's the main thing that you actually need? And the reason I say need is because there's a difference between what you want and what you need. That's hard to hear, but there's a difference between what you want and what you need. Sometimes the things that we want are what we lead with versus what we need, especially in academia. Number two, the awareness of what kind of support would be the most helpful. Now, we may be connected to a lot of support, but is it the most helpful to what you need? Is it the most helpful to what you need? And are you aware of it? The third one talks about the confidence in you being able to communicate your needs to others effectively. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, I'm very big about thinking I can communicate well. I've grown in this area, but originally you couldn't tell me that I couldn't have a good conversation. But are you able to have the confidence to communicate what you need to others effectively? You may be able to communicate, but are you articulating it effectively to get your point across about what you need? Now, we're going to talk a little bit about communication, because in order to self-advocate, you need to be able to have a clear understanding of what communication is derived from. So when we think about communication, nearly 75% of communications that are received are interpreted incorrectly. That means we get it wrong. 75%. Yes. So that means most of the communication that you take in, you don't take it in the right way. So there's a rule called the 738-55 rule. And a lot of times we may or may not have heard of it, but it's 55% nonverbal, 38% vocal, and 7% words only. So there was a behavioral psychologist, his name is Dr. Albert Mehrabian, and he understood the power of nonverbal communication and its importance enough to create this rule. So that means that 7% of all of our communication is done by the words that we speak. 38% is made up of the tone of our voice, and 55% is derived from our body language and our facial expressions. 55%. So even as I'm talking, most of us are tuning in to my body language and my facial expressions. Although I'm communicating with words, that's not the most of what you're paying attention to. I also put on here email and text exchanges, because right now we're in society where that's where we exchange a lot of our communication. So if you think about it, how many of you all would, you don't have to necessarily say it out loud, you can put it in the chat as well for us to talk about later, but how many of you all have sent an email or received an email and you had to decide what you thought the other person was saying? Or even a text exchange between yourself and a friend, and they said something back and you thought, that's not what I meant, but it's because they weren't able to see your face or to hear your tone of your voice either to interpret what it was that you were saying. So as we're moving through this, I want you all to keep that at the forefront of your mind, how important it is for communication to be interpreted the right way. Okay? So plan of action. Self-advocacy characteristics are tailored around self-awareness, knowledge of rights. And what I mean by that is not just your rights as a scholar or a faculty member or just a professional, but knowledge of the rights that you have to advocate for yourself. But they both are connected to communication, as we just talked about. And when I say they lend to the foundation of leadership, all of us are leaders. And you may be thinking, I'm not a leader. I don't have a desire to be in a leadership role, but you are a leader for your own path. You are a leader for you to be able to advocate for yourself about the plan that you want for your life. So all of the self-advocacy characteristics are tailored around you being aware of yourself. What do you need? What are the things that make you are making you be able to progress effectively? What are the knowledge of your rights that you have in the space that you're in? And how are they connected to the way that you communicate? Do you know the way that you communicate? It is important to create an effective plan and build out your self-advocacy strategies. Now, I'm going to give you a simplistic way to do that, but my self-care and self-advocacy strategies are not the same as yours. They all have things in common, but they're not the same, and they shouldn't be, because I don't communicate the same as you. I don't necessarily have the same space that I'm functioning in as you, but I need to have an effective plan of how I'm going to be able to self-advocate regardless of the space that I'm in that's effective for me. So as we're moving through this, I want you to think about what's an effective plan that you can build out for your self-advocacy strategy. I tailored it around what, who, when, where, how. Now, I know we typically say it the other way, who, what, when, where, and how. But there's a reason that I have them in place this way. It's what, who, when, where, and how. When we talk about what, before I get into these, if you see any space that says scholar or anything like that, you can replace it with you if it doesn't fit to your personal space. What do you need to know or to receive from others to accomplish your goal? Again, need, not want. What do you need to know or to receive from others to accomplish your goal? This could be anything from information about course requirements that you may need. This could be anything about you needing to know how you need to pivot when you're dealing with a challenging encounter with a professor or a colleague. But you need to be sure that you are able to name and address an individual's ask clearly. So you need to be able to make sure that you're able to name it and describe it clearly. What is it? That's the challenge. Oh, well, it's A, and it's B, and it's C, and it's D. What is it that the challenge is? And what is it that you need? Be clear in your own mind what a good solution would be. I could tell you a good solution, but I'm not the one that has to walk the plan. I can help you find steps to it, but there's a difference between you being clear about what a good solution is. The reason I say that is because a lot of times someone may help you come up with a good solution, and after they've helped you come up with a good solution, you walk through 2 or 3 steps and you're like, yeah, I don't necessarily like that. And that's okay, but what feels good to you? This is your journey. And this is your space. What's a good solution to you? Who? Who is most likely to have what you need? The power. Now, when we hear the word power, it's like, oh, we know who sits in the seats of power. I don't necessarily mean just in that way. What I mean in power, it could just mean access to certain departments or connections, resources, knowledge. That means just information, or who could provide it to you. Who is that individual, or who are those individuals? This is just like research. Take time to find out who is in charge or most likely to be knowledgeable and helpful. If a scholar that you're helping is unsure, or if you are unsure, ask someone that you trust to direct you or introduce you to the right person. In most cases, try the simplest and most direct solution first. So for me, this was very big. One of the people that I had on my community space at the top was one of my academic mentors. When I first came to the school, when I was getting my bachelor's, I was supposed to be on scholarship. I saw the financial space that said I owed money, and I decided that I was not going to tolerate it. Now, my communication was not as effective in the financial aid office. I had stood in line. All of these things were going on, but I met her in the hallway and she could see my frustration on my face. She knew who I needed to speak to. She had the power, which was the connections, and the knowledge, and she provided it to me. What she did not do was do the work for me. Sometimes that's what we want. She taught me how to advocate. She also taught me something very interesting about this part here. She taught me how to take care of those relationships of the people that she introduced me to. Because sometimes we make the connections for that momentary need, and then we no longer maintain those relationships. And the reason why I want to make sure that you understand that that's important is because when, not if, but when you have another challenge come up again, it doesn't feel as misused in that relationship when you're only calling on them when you need something. Because if you think about it, how many of us want to be manipulated or used only when we're good for something? We don't. And so just taking care of the relationship, even if it's just a professional networking relationship, they're valuable, not because of just what they do for you, but because of who they are. That was a very monumental time for me learning that. Some of them I'm still in contact with right now, and I'm not at the institution anymore. So just make sure that you take care of those relationships when you begin to build them. When is it most effective and appropriate to raise an issue? I'm laughing because for us, when a situation is going on, it is absolutely the most appropriate time because we're upset or we're emotional, something has happened and we want it resolved right then. We have to remember that just because it's urgent to us doesn't mean it's urgent to the person that we're having the conversation with. And sometimes we take it in that they don't care. But that doesn't necessarily mean that that's the truth. One person's urgency doesn't equate a lack of concern. It's just not urgent in that moment to them. So we make the assumption that because they're not having the same reaction, that they do not care. They're not sharing the same experience. That's all. When is it correct to interrupt someone? And when is it better to wait? Sometimes this is based off of positions of where you're sitting, but you also have to be mindful of cultural differences. In some cultures, when we are talking, I think about myself, I'm very passionate. I talk with my hands. My mother taught me a long time ago, you're supposed to sit on your hands when you're talking. Well, I've just had to learn that over the years, to not talk so much with your hands. But if you approach someone that is not necessarily exposed to that, and you're constantly doing that, that may be something that causes them to shut down as soon as you're having a conversation with them. And so what space they may have been to be open to hearing you, they're no longer open to it because in their culture, this is something that is seen as disrespectful. So you can't automatically assume that it's okay to approach them in the way that is acceptable within your space. When is it acceptable to draw attention to your feelings and opinions? When is it considered impolite or disruptive? Are your feelings valid? Yes. Is your situation or concern valid? Absolutely. But when is it an acceptable time? Try to approach people when they are able to give you their full attention and not when they are multitasking or interacting with someone else. Think about if it was you, would you want someone coming up to you when you're in the middle of doing 12 things and wanting your undivided attention? No. Most of us wouldn't. But again, if we lead with our emotions, we tend to not think clearly through the process. Tell them what you want and ask whether they have time to address it now or would they prefer to do so later. Most people appreciate it if you give them a choice. Time is one of the most valuable gifts that everyone has and you can't get back. So asking them makes them feel like that you're considering their time. Where? where is this type of question or need typically addressed? So think about what need you have. Where do you typically see this addressed at? So if I have a challenge with something that's going on in my department, am I going to address this in the hallway in front of my other colleagues? Am I going to address this at a staff meeting? Should a subject be discussed in private or should it be discussed in public? It is usually best to choose a place where the other person will feel comfortable. In the beginning, again, I said the conversation is about you. And because it is, if you put someone else in an uncomfortable position, you're less likely to get what you need. Because if it was you and someone is asking you something in public, you're less likely to be open to have a conversation or to resolve the matter because you're embarrassed. Not because you're not concerned about the topic, but because they have put you in an embarrassing situation. How do scholars, or how do you typically express yourself in different informal or formal situations? We respond very differently to each one. So the way that I'm responding right now is very different than how I respond with my friends. The way I would respond with my business partner is very different than how I would respond with my mentor. And it's the same for the person that you're advocating to as well. How much detail and background about yourself should you give when you're interacting with others? This is based off of the dynamic of the relationship that you have with them. Again, my mentors have known me for a long time, so I don't need to tell them, hi, my name is Amy, I'm a C coordinator at Texas. I don't need to go through the rundown of that. If I'm speaking to a stranger that maybe I was on a committee or a Zoom call with, and there was a challenge that came up, I may give them a brief synopsis of what I do, but it should always be tailored towards the goal that you're trying to achieve. So I would inform them of the work that I do, but I would bridge it in a manner that lets them know of what I'm trying to achieve. So I would be mindful to say something that's around the framework of, I'm mindful to evaluate situations where people are uncomfortable and to make sure that they have space where they belong. So in this particular conference or Zoom that we were in, I noticed something that was a little bit of a challenge for me. So I just wanted to know if you had a moment for us to discuss it. So I would tell them what I did, but I would also make sure that it went right to the point and was direct about what was going on. So make sure that you are mindful of what it is that you're sharing based off of the relationship of who it is that you're with. Okay? So I could allow you all to just have the information, but I'm very adamant about knowing that when you're put in situations, it's more helpful to you than it is for you to just be told information. So what we're getting ready to do is you all are getting ready to go in breakout rooms and have actual scenarios where you're going to be able to have the opportunity to have some experiences engaging with each other about how you would react to certain scenarios where you could have an opportunity to advocate or see what someone else's response to having a self-advocacy moment is like. Okay? Assuming everyone's made it back in, I hope that this was an opportunity for you all to be able to just see different scenarios. I know that it doesn't cover every scenario that you may have with self-advocacy, and that's understandable. I did have the chance to join in the different groups, and I was happy to hear the engagement and also to hear some of the perspectives that you all had. And so it just shows the wealth of knowledge that you all bring to the table. I do want to share a reminder that self-advocacy is the ability to communicate what your needs are. Self-advocacy is not about having all the answers. So just even hearing some of you all have different perspectives, I don't think I have all the answers, and I'm not supposed to. I think that's the beauty of us being able to come together in this space today. It just shows that all of us have different perspectives. We all have different experiences. We come from different walks of life. There were different perspectives that I was able to hear from some of you all that I was like, oh, that's a different take on it. And I think that that's the beauty of us being able to have the opportunity to be in this space as a collective, is that we all have something to offer. An effective self-advocate is one who asks the right questions. That's one of the main things to just hold fast to. So I wanted to give you the opportunity to ask me a few questions. I know we're kind of wrapping up on time, but are there any questions that you may have for me? Just wanted to give you the chance to do that.
So Amy, we do have a couple of questions in the chat.
Okay.
One is, what advice do you have for people who are taught that righteous indignation about racial and other injustice merits an unpleasant tone?
Can you repeat that one more time? Sorry.
Yeah, sure. What advice do you have for people who are taught that righteous indignation about racial and other injustices merits an unpleasant tone?
What advice do I have about that? That are taught that?
Yes.
I would say the beauty of things nowadays, I would say, is that we have access to a lot more information. And then also the beauty is also that you have the space to unlearn some things that are not necessarily beneficial to you now. There's a lot of things that I was taught as well that's connected to that question, that I'm learning that what necessarily may have served some people that have offered me that doesn't necessarily mean that it's of service to me now. I would safely answer it that way.
Okay.
So
And
give room to being able to give room to being able to learn some new things in a new way.
Okay. And that kind of leads into the second question that was posted. How can a person learn advocacy for themselves when they were raised not to rock the boat? You know, be quiet, just work out, keep your head down.
I think that's a very good question. I'm from a very small town that's predominantly one demographic. And so in knowing that also you were taught to kind of keep your head down, go with the flow, I think a lot of it has to do with putting yourself in spaces such as this. You know, thankfully, SREB creates opportunities for you to be in spaces with webinars like this, but also joining affinity groups, spaces where you have communal spaces where you can be around people that teach you skill sets to begin to have the hard conversations. But I think also continuing to role play these type of conversations. We don't necessarily pick up skill sets and not utilize them. The more you utilize them, the more comfortable you begin to feel to put the things in place. It's no different than learning a bike. Like, you can buy a bike, and if you don't use it or learn how to ride it, it doesn't feel comfortable to you. So I think it's the same as beginning to learn how to advocate, is putting yourself in spaces where you can begin to be around people that are doing the work. And we have so much knowledge that's at our fingertips, whether it's YouTube or groups such as this that are going to be able to support you making the steps. And they don't have to be big steps. I think a lot of times we look at steps as they have to be huge. Small steps make the giant move. I hope that answered the question.
Are there any other questions? We've got a couple of minutes left, so you can post them in the chat or unmute yourself and ask.
Miss Amy, I have a question. This is Danette, real quick.
Hi.
So when you're taught, especially in the South all your life, that, you know, young ladies don't talk out, we just kind of go with the flow. And then when you grow up and you get that voice and you start advocating for yourself, they see you as always causing a disturbance, but you're really advocating for yourself. So how do you maneuver that?
Yes, ma'am. First of all, nice to meet you. And second of all, thank you for unmuting yourself and speaking up. I would say even just what you're doing now, beginning to put yourself, there's nothing wrong with it. I call myself a table shaker. I think that beginning to take the mindset of, again, unlearning those narratives that have been placed on us, especially as women. Creating a community that does support what you do. There are a lot of women that feel the same way that you do. And I think support, again, community is very important. Putting yourself around people that have had the same experiences are very vital to you continuing to have these kind of conversations. There's always going to be someone that has something to say because they're more challenged by what you're saying than it is about who's saying it. That means that you're clearly challenging the narrative that needs to be challenged. I would also say to make sure that you're adamant about putting yourself in spaces to do readings. I don't know if you listen to podcasts as well, but making sure that the spaces that you're in are supportive of the place that you're trying to go. What I mean by that is if you're in a space where people are continuing to remind you of what you shouldn't do, a lot of times it will keep us from doing the things that we want to do. So if you have people that are repeating to you that you should be quiet, you need to be around people that are going to support you, opening up a space where they support you being vocal with your voice. For example, the people that I have around me, they know that I'm a table shaker on purpose. I know that's what I'm called to do. But I have people around me that know that, and they remind me to do that when it gets hard. It's not going to be easy, but find people that value your voice. Find people that value what you're trying to do. Even if it's one or two. Affirmations, writing them around you. I also think making sure that in the community, finding spaces that have resource groups that do that as well. And it's going to take time. This is like, it wasn't overnight for you to begin to not believe those things about yourself. It's going to take time for you to believe those things about yourself.
Thank you. I enjoyed your presentation.
Thank you. I enjoyed you coming.
Amy, this is Dr. A here. It also occurs to me that practice is important in this whole scenario about self-advocacy, because if one does not come by those behaviors, quote unquote, naturally or easily,
absolutely,
the more you do it, the better you get at it, the more you understand the nuances of how to self-advocate in different situations. And you know, one has to be comfortable and willing to put themselves out there to do it and just keep getting better and better at it until it becomes second nature.
Yes.
If you do that, it really does. It is about practicing the art of it, or the behaviors that go with being a good self-advocate and knowing when to do it. All the things you pointed out, you got to practice it doing that and when to do it appropriately. Absolutely,
Dr. Abraham. I think you even pinpointed something that I was going to close with, is make sure that you practice in safe spaces. Don't put yourself in spaces that don't feel safe. And what I mean by that is a lot of stuff that I did when I first started self-advocating was practice with my friends, or practice on my friends. I'll say it that way. I would make them pretend to be whoever I needed to have this conversation with, because you're going to need to cry. You're going to need to get upset first. You're going to need to get through those emotions first. And that's okay. That's what I mean by making sure that you have a circle or a community that you can trust before you go and have these actual conversations, because it is important that you have these practice trial runs through these situations before you have the actual encounters first, because then it doesn't feel as foreign when it's time for you to have the actual conversation, whatever the issue may be. But those people feel safer to you than the people that you may actually have to have the challenge with.
Indeed.
And for us programmatically, I mean, that is what our Institute on Teaching and Mentoring is about, is really talking about safe spaces. You really get to come into a situation and circumstance where you can really exercise a lot of that.
Yes.
and you're in spaces where people are generally going to support you, challenge you positively, and there's little risk, if you will, to you. It is an opportunity to do that.
Yes.
And we, you know, that's the intentionality of having that kind of safe space, if you will, for our scholars to have those kinds of opportunities.
Like even here, I mean, just for this webinar to
just doing this webinar, exactly.
It's safe in itself.
Yes, exactly.
Well, Amy, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been absolutely fantastic. And I can't speak for everybody else, but I know I learned some things myself. So thank you again. Veronica has put into the chat a survey link for this webinar. Please, when you get a couple of moments, fill out that survey. And this webinar recording will be available in a day or two. So with that, we will bid you adieu. Have a great rest of the week.
Thank you.
Thanks,
so much.
Amy, very much. And
Thank
thank
you.
all
You all
of
have a
you
great
for
time.
showing up and speaking up.
Yes, thank you so
We'll
much.
talk.
I appreciate the opportunity.
All right, we'll talk to everyone again real soon. Thank you all.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.